Hello friends, let us now learn some important points about the lead content. So lead content of the grid is expressed as grams per centimeter square. An easy way to understand this lead content is to imagine cutting a grid up to 1 centimeter squares, then weight in grams is the lead content of the grid. So the amount of lead in a grid is a good indicator of its ability to improve the contrast, provided the grid is well designed. Poor design would be solid sheet of lead. So if the grid is good, then the amount of lead is a good indicator of the ability to improve the contrast. There is a definitive relationship between the grid ratio, lead content, and the number of lines per inch. If the grid ratio remains constant, number of lines per inch are increased, then lead content must decrease. So if you see, this is the grid of height h. The lead strips are of height h and the distance between the interspace is given d. Then the grid ratio is the height of the lead strips divided by the distance between the interspaces. Distance of the interspaces. So this is the grid ratio. As the number of lines per inch increases, this distance between the distance of interspaces will decrease. So if this distance of interspaces will decrease, then the height of the lead should decrease in order to keep the grid ratio constant. So to keep the grid ratio constant, the height of the lid should also decrease. So when height of the lid decreases, the lid content also decreases. So if the grid ratio is constant, the number of lines per inch increases. So this will decrease the distance between the interspaces and lead content will decrease. The second way is to thin the lead strips. One more way is to decrease the thickness of the lead strips or decrease the thickness of interspaces. So when you use thinner lead strips, this also will decrease the lead content. So number one, lead strips are made thinner. So first we will see how the lead strips are made thinner. So these are uh, the interspace between the lead strips is 0.3 mm. The height of the lead strips is 3 mm, whereas the width of the lead strip is around 0.06 millimeters. So the grid ratio is 10:1 and the lines per inch is 71 for this arrangement, whereas the lead content is around 60. Now in the similar way, for the same arrangement, if the lead strips are made thinner, here the lead strips are made thinner, that is each lead strip width is around 0.03 millimeters, which is lesser than 0.06 millimeters normally, and the width of the interspaces is same, that is 0.3 mm, and height is also same, which is 3 mm. So in this will decrease the thickness of the lead strips. So on decreasing the thickness of the lead strips, there is small increase in number of lines per inch. So here the number of lines per inch increases without affecting the grid ratio because the thickness of the lead strips decreases, so which also decreases the lead content. So grid ratio here is around 10:1 and the lines per inch are increased from 71 to 77 and the lead content is also decreased from 600 to 326. So here when the lead strips are made thinner, there is small increase in the number of lines per inch at the cost of large decrease in lead content. So the lead content is a lot decreased. So the cost of equipment also decreases. Then one more important thing is you can decrease the distance between the interspaces. So the decrease in width of the interspaces or thickness of interspaces. So if you take the same thing, here the thickness or width of the interspaces is 0.3 mm. Now the width of the interspaces is decreased to 0.2 mm. The thickness of the lead strips is same, 0.06 mm, whereas the height of the lead strips is also same, that is 3 mm. So we are decreasing the distance or thickness width of the interspaces. So when we decrease the width of the interspaces, this will also increase the number of lines per inch. So in this situation here, this 0.03 mm is the decrease in width of the lead strips. So for making the 0.3 mm, if 0.03 mm to 0.3 mm, we have to multiply this 0.03 to 10 times. That means if you keep 10 of these lead strips together, you get this 0.3 mm width. So but here the decrease in interspace is around 0.1. So we have, if we by just placing 3 of these, we have to add one more of this. I don't know how to put this into words, but the number of lines per inch is increased more here when compared to the previous one. That's the only thing that I can say. So decrease in width of the interspaces will result in more increase in number of lines per inch. So grid ratio is constant, that is the height of the lead strip to the distance between the interspaces is constant. So if distance between the interspaces is constant, here the height of the lead strip should also decrease for the grid ratio to be constant. So lead strips are made shorter to keep the grid ratio constant. So because the lead strips are made shorter, now again the lead content is decreased. Here the grid ratio is 10:1 and the lines per inch is 98, which is more when compared to 77 previously, and lead content is decreased, but the decrease in lead content is not similar to the one when we decrease the width of the lead strips. So in this figure, the lead strips are made shorter to keep the grid ratio constant, and the length of the lead content of the grid decreases. This it puts a limitation on the number of lines per inch a grid may have and still be effective. So grids, in practice, grids are constructed with many lines per inch. Both the thickness and heights of the lead strips are decreased. These grids are thinner and improve contrast less than the grids of comparable ratios with fewer lines per inch. So the grids are made thinner and they improve contrast also, but the contrast improvement is less than the grids of comparable ratio with fewer lines per inch. That means, for example, 133 lines per inch 10:1 grid improves contrast about the same time as 80 lines per inch 8:1 grid. So that means here as the thickness and height of the lead strips increases, the lead content will decrease. So as the thickness and height of the lead strips decreases, the lead content will decrease. So the grids improve contrast less than the grids with less lines per inch. So this less lines per inch grid will have of around 8:1 will be almost equal in contrast to 133 lines per inch 10:1 grid, because here there are more lines per inch, though there is stronger grid with more lines per inch, and this is a weaker grid but less lines per inch. Because there are less lines per inch, this improvement in contrast is almost equal to the more lines per inch stronger grid. Thank you.